Hi guys, welcome to another podcast with Horsemanship from Ginny. I'm Yaz, and in today's podcast we're going to be talking about why natural horsemanship can cause problems. Now, I know I work with horses largely using natural horsemanship methods, but they're not pure to what you would see Western riders using, really. The way I work with horses is largely a lot of different people's methods, kind of bastardised into what I do. I don't have a name for my method. It's not the Pat Pirelli, it's not the TRT method. I'm just Yaz. I work with horses and I like to fix the problems. I've taken lots of different things from different trainers I don't like, trainers I do like, because even if you don't like certain trainers and the way they do stuff, you can often use what they use and tone it down or change it a little bit. There are bits out of things from everyone you can take, even whether you like them or not. So I'm going to talk about why natural horsemanship can cause problems. Despite me largely using natural horsemanship, the issues it causes problems specifically with horses that are ridden for English riding. This doesn't really apply to Western ridden horses because natural horsemanship was built around the Western way of riding and the way of training Western horses. It's very effective at creating relaxation, creating obedience in horses, submission, all that other good stuff that people want from a nice, well-rounded cow horse, essentially, a working horse. Western riding is designed to... Obviously, there are sports in it as well, but it is designed to mimic the old way that they used to work with horses back in the old days, in the Old West, whatever you want to call it. And oftentimes you will see horses that are capable of working on their own without riders. What I've seen from videos and stuff of horses, especially cow horses, is a huge benefit to those horses is when you're working with those cattle out there, you can oftentimes get off the horse and the horse will keep the cow away while the rider works on the calf or whatever, and they'll keep the mum away from you because... From what I've seen, those cows are really quite aggressive with their with the ranchers and stuff out there. They're not as placid as the cows we get in the UK. So the big difference between English and Western riding, outside of the position you sit in, the saddle and the tack we use, is what we ask of our horses. So Western riders, like I've already said, the horses can work on their own. You're oftentimes seeing videos come up on Facebook, TikTok, where a rider's falling off, barrel racing maybe, doing gymkhana games, pole weaving, whatever, working with cows, cow cutting. And the horses, when the riders fall off, the horses will carry on their job a lot of the time. They know what they're doing and they'll do it on their own. They may not do it as well without a rider as they do once the rider's fallen off. They probably don't do it as well, but they can still do it on their own. However, you get a horse in a show jumping ring, it may go off and jump fences, but it's not going to jump them in the right order. You fall off in a dressage ring, that horse isn't going to carry on its dressage test. You carry on in the cross country, the horse is more than likely in the cross country, going to gallop past the fences rather than over the fences. You're unlikely to see English ridden horses, I just don't think you can. You just don't see it. You don't see English-ridden horses that can go on and carry on their jobs on their own. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the different styles of riding, the different sports we're doing with our horses. They have different requirements from the horse. But the big issue I see when I come to work with horses that the owners have done natural horsemanship with their horses, usually to try and fix an issue that they have come up with the horses, or they're just interested in natural horsemanship, so they start playing around with it with the horses, and it can cause this one big issue, which is franticness. Now, a frantic horse isn't a huge problem at lower level riding. When your horse is doing a prelim dressage test or they're doing an 80 centimetre show jumping course, it's not a huge issue if you've got a horse that's a bit frantic. It doesn't really present itself unless the horse's franticness translates into high levels of stress. Once you start getting into more advanced movements, higher fences, faster speeds, then this franticness will start to become a problem. And so you have to try and stop the horse from becoming frantic from the very beginning. So although it's not a huge problem in walk, trot, canter tests, if you're trying to advance from a walk, trot, canter test, especially if you want to go up to the levels of Grand Prix, you need to make sure your horse is off the aids and isn't guessing. So franticness is caused by horses guessing. So natural horsemanship naturally uses relatively quite a lot of pressure, and oftentimes what people will do is when they've got a horse that has a tendency to get stressed, is they will give them an easy win. So by an easy win, I mean what they'll do is they were just about to ask the horse, maybe you're sending them out on a lunge, left or right, they were just about to ask the horse to go left after it's gone right. So they've sent the horse to the right, they've asked them to turn in, and now they want them to go left. And the horses are obviously very good at picking up patterns, so a lot of horses, once you've asked them to go right, you've asked them to turn in, they'll shoot off to the left before you've even asked them. Looks like a good thing. It looks like the horse is learning, they've got what you want, but what you've actually done is allowed your horse to guess what they're doing next rather than wait for you to tell them what to do next. That's, again, like I said, it doesn't look like a problem until you weren't going to ask them to turn left. Maybe you were going to ask them to back up. Maybe you just wanted them to stand there for a minute and chill out. They'd done really well, they'd worked really hard on the right rein, and you just want them to stand and process it all. You can also have it if you've asked your horse to back up and you're consistently asking them to walk on, back off, walk on, back up, walk on, back up. When you ask your horse to back up, instead of stopping, the horse will immediately push forwards and start to walk on again, which is all well and good unless you've asked your horse to back up in order to get them out of your space, or you want them to, they've moved forwards and you want them to stand a little bit further back. So if you're consistently asking your horse forwards and backwards and they've got it into a pattern rather than an individual behaviour, then you're going to have arguments with your horse and you're going to end up telling them off for something that they think they're doing right, which creates stress and creates a frantic horse. Because what they then will do, if they've had a lot of success in that pattern of behaviours, consistently getting loads and loads of success because that's what you've been asking of them, when you then tell them no, that's wrong, what the horse will often do is try and do it harder. So they'll try and do it more. So if you've asked your horse to back off and they then come forward, you tell them to back off again, you tell them a bit stricter this time, your horse might decide to push forward with more strength because previously that is what has won them their reward or their release of pressure, and as their stress levels go up, they will just try and do it harder, and they'll do it, and it'll start to get more and more stressful, more and more dangerous. People end up shouting at the horses, putting lots of pressure on their horses, when they should have taught their horse to stand after the backup in the first place. So I'm going to talk about this more in the sense of dressage because it's more obvious when horses miss their aids or guess in a dressage test at high levels than it is in other things. So in show jumping or cross country, you can have quite devastating accidents in those scenarios when the horse doesn't listen to you. So it can become more obvious to the horse why they should have listened when you ask them to turn in a certain way, not cut the corner, to go round the corner, the way you've asked them to do, because then if they have an accident afterwards, or they knock the pole or they clap the knee, or even, say for a cross country, have a rotational fall, it's really obvious to the horse what happened and why. Whereas in dressage, it's far more difficult for horses. And obviously dressage is just schooling to higher levels. If you start going up to Grand Prix, dressage is just French for training. That's all you're doing. So any schooling we're doing with horses, if you've got a horse that's frantic and guessing a lot, even in the show jumping ring, and they start to figure it out, but they've got a habit of guessing, you're going to have problems when it comes to schooling them on the flat anyway. So like I said, a frantic horse in the lower levels doesn't really cause too many issues. At worst, you're probably going to be getting a horse that's, for example, say you have a prelim test where you canter at F, you go round the corner and you change the rein, and at X you're going to trot to change the lead. Your horse may do it early. That's usually the worst you're going to get from a horse, and you end up having to put your leg on to maintain the canter until you get to X, and then you end up having to ask for the trot, and because you've put your leg on, maybe the trot hollows out, maybe it's a bit harder to get the trot because the horse has been trying to trot for a while, or maybe you're not supposed to canter until A, maybe, and then your horse jumps straight back into canter at the X marker after they've come back into trot, and you're supposed to stay in trot for a little while. Minor issues, but it will still cause stress and upset in your horse. Now, there are several ways you can prevent this. Obviously, not riding the same shapes over and over again will stop horses from making these guesses, not consistently asking for your horse for a canter at the F, changing the rein, and then asking for a canter in the next corner. You're less likely to get a horse that starts being like, we're going to canter, and then you're having to hold them back. But to begin with, to prevent all these issues, your foundations have to be solid in the groundwork. If you've got a horse that listens to everything you say rather than guesses and pops off into trot, say on the lunge, second you put them out on the lunge and they get away from you, they start trotting, that's a horse that's guessing. That's a horse that's showing early signs of stress. Not only does this cause stress for the horse because they're getting it wrong, and like I said, if they start getting it wrong and they've been consistently getting it right, doing the same things, they try harder. It also causes a huge amount of frustration for the rider. Frustration in the rider is always really quite dangerous when riding, not necessarily dangerous to the rider or to the health of the horse, but I mean it in a way that it scares the horse. Frustration, it never presents in a healthy way, conductive of good training. As you move up the levels, you get things like when you're doing free walk on a long rein and you gather your reins up, so you've got a horse that can piaffe or passage, they may pop into a piaffe or passage rather than staying in the walk. Oftentimes this can be put down to the way the riders ask for the horse to bring their head back up and start shortening the reins. They can often restrict the head, restrict the hip movements, which can create a jog in the horse. But outside of those other things, because all these things can be caused by lots of different things, if you've got a horse that's consistently doing it throughout their training sessions and throughout their dressage tests making mistakes, is if they just were waiting for the aid, if they just waited for the aid, waited to be told what to do, a lot of these problems can be avoided. So, like I said, the way it's caused is often people trying to give stressful horses easy wins. So, like I said, if you've asked your horse to go on the right rein, you ask them to turn in, and they go off to the left, a lot of people will then go, yep, well, I was going to ask them for that anyway. Clever horse, well done, I'll let you have that. Or say, for example, I was about to ask you to pick your foot up for me, but you picked it up early. Again, seems like a good thing. It's all well and good until you want to feel the horse's tendons, and the horse is picking their foot up to be picked out. Small things, they all seem like really small things, but as you go up the levels and you start asking your horse for more things, it creates problems. Especially when we've got these hot, explosive horses. The second you tell them, no, that was wrong, what they can often then do, like I said, this is more of a problem as you get into the higher levels of dressage and the higher levels of schooling, because if your horse knows walk, trot and canter, it's got 3 things to choose from. So the chances of it guessing right are higher, so they're less likely to get into conflict with the rider. Whereas if you've got a horse that knows passage, piaffe, half pass, shoulder in, travers, renvers, all these different things, there are lots of behaviours that those horses can cycle through to try and get the right one. And what happens when that happens is oftentimes you want to reward them for the thing that you asked them for. Say, for example, you were just going to ask them to trot or maybe shoulder in. If your horse is throwing 10, 20 behaviours at you, the horse can cycle through them so quickly that when they show you the thing you want, you miss it. And then you have to ask them again, and then you miss it again, and you have to ask them again, and you miss it again, until you get to the point where you go, we just need to stop for a second. If the rider gets to that point, a lot of riders don't get to that point, and they will just keep fighting their horses through the stress, and it's never going to work. If the rider gets to the point where they go, let's just stop, calm down, we're going to try again. That, while it's useful, and it's better than getting frustrated with your horse and just fighting them through the stress, it doesn't solve the problem that the horse got to that state in the first place. But yes, if you've got to that place, bring your horse down. Don't keep asking them for things because they're clearly not getting it. It's only going to get harder and harder for that horse. if you keep pushing them, and you're going to find it next to impossible to actually capture the behaviour you want to reward. And even if your timing is impeccable and you reward the horse, say you're asking for a shoulder in and the horse has got right frantic and it started half passing across the school, or throwing travers or renvers and it's doing it wrong, even if once you do get that shoulder in, you say you drop your reins or give your horse a pat to tell them well done, they may cycle through to the next behaviour anyway, and they miss their own reward. They miss it themselves because they're so stressed out they don't recognise it. If this then continues and you keep getting frustrated with your horse and you don't give them a break and reset, you're just going to end up with a horse that starts exploding. Oftentimes they'll start rearing. Some will go to bolting, but more often than not, I find horses end up slamming the brakes on and popping up in the front end. Then they get in trouble for rearing up, and it just ends up in a never-ending cycle of stress for both rider and the horse, when all you have to do to prevent these issues is make sure the horse isn't guessing in the early stages of training. The horse must be off the aids. Again, this is what I mean by in Western riding, it doesn't matter so much, because if the horse guesses, chances are they've guessed it right, for one. And so it's fine if they guess, because you want the horse to be thinking on their own and making their own decisions. If you're working a horse in front of cows, the time it takes for me as a rider to see a cow going off to the right, the horse is maybe on the left balance, cow shot to the right. By the time I've seen it, told the horse what to do, the horse has responded to me, chances are you've lost the cow. That's not a problem in English riding. So we need our horses to be off the aids, because especially in dressage, you want to canter at F and your horse starts cantering at E because they feel your intentions. That's also a really important part. Horses are very, very good at feeling your intentions. So you thinking about cantering is enough for a horse to know what you're going to ask them to do. If the horse responds too sensitively to your intentions, that also causes a problem. When you have to teach your horse that your intentions are a warning, essentially. I'm about to ask you to do this. It preps the horse for what you're about to ask them to do. So then when you actually give the aid, the horse has a full understanding of what they were about to be asked to do, how to set the body up to do it, and then they pop nicely, say, into the canter, into the passage, into a canter pirouette, whatever you're setting your horse up to do. That intention should be setting your horse up, not a cue for what they're doing. Because I don't know about anyone else, when I'm riding a dressage test, I'm looking ahead to what I'm about to do next. And some people, I've known a few dressage riders who think quite far ahead, because they've got a lot going on in their tests, especially in the higher up tests, the more advanced tests. And they might be thinking 3 moves ahead. So if your horse is going off your intentions, you could end up having your horse doing a canter pirouette that they're supposed to be doing in the centre of the school, instead of maybe the one-time changes you're going to ask them to do. But you're going to do a canter pirouette after your last one-time change. Things like that can set your horse up to failure. Whereas if from the very early stages of training, we never let our horses win through guessing. And I'm not saying if the horse guesses you tell them off. You just go, no, that's not what I asked of you. We're going to stop for a minute, and then you're going to wait for me to ask you what to do. Same with horses that walk off as soon as someone mounts them. They're not horses that are waiting for the aids. They're horses that are guessing. And then you pull the horse up in the reins and tell them to stand so you can get your feet in your stirrups and you can get your girth done up, and your horse is constantly trying to walk on because they know that's what's going to happen, and they're only being held there by the reins. Horses like that are common for rearing up. Or the rider can end up sat behind the saddle instead of on the saddle, which for a horse that's already stressed and marching off can cause disastrous effects. So like I was saying, Western riding is designed all around working cattle and livestock, and horses being functional for that kind of work. There are sports surrounding it that divert off from the original use of Western riding, but that's largely where it all stems from. That's where natural horsemanship stems from. It stems from that kind of development and that kind of work. Whereas English riding is largely developed from the military. It's strict on the aids, on command, it's in time with one another, it's all very controlled. Very fancy, showing off what the horses can do, designed. Obviously, it's been bastardised a lot since we've stopped using horses for war, but it's designed to show the capabilities of horses and the control that riders have over them. Maybe control riders have over them is not the right wording, but the partnership and the artistry that dressage is to show it all off at the highest level to as much to perfection as you can possibly get. But if you've got a horse that's not on your aids and they're responding early to you, you're going to miss a lot of those marks. And naturally, people, especially when they don't understand why the horses are doing it and why the horses aren't on the aids and why they're going into canter early, why they're piaffing early, passaging early, or maybe they won't stand because they're stressed. Whatever they're doing, oftentimes the horses don't understand why they're doing it, and riders come to the point where with these kinds of horses they just go, if you just stopped and listened to me, we wouldn't be having this problem. I had it with Ginny because obviously I mixed mine up with Western riding and English riding. It created a lot of confusion, but when I taught Ginny to lie down, I wasn't clear enough about the difference between a lie down and picking her foot up. So what she would do when you picked her foot up to pick her feet out or for the farrier, she'd start to lie down, and then she'd get in trouble for it, so she'd get frantic, so you'd do it again, so she'd try and lie down faster. It created a cycle of stress for both us and the horse, just because it wasn't taught properly, wasn't taught clearly enough, and wasn't given a clear distinction as to what I was asking of her, and the differentiate between, I can't say the damn word, that word, between picking her foot up to lie down and picking her foot up to have her feet done or feet picked out. It created a lot of problems, and I ended up having to put a stop to asking her to lie down entirely in order to sort it out. So it's not that natural horsemanship shouldn't be used, because I think it's one of the best ways to train horses. I think it's a great foundation for horses to train with. But what you have to do is make the necessary adjustments to that training to make sure your horse is listening to you, not going ahead of your aids, not guessing. You're not setting patterns for your horse to guess. And most importantly, when you're asking horses to do bursts of high energy, so if you're sending them off to the right really quickly and you want them to turn in and you want them to do it effectively and you want them to do it nice and smoothly, they need a bit of energy behind them. But what's really important, if you're putting energy into the horse, is when you've asked them to change the behaviour, is they get a moment to stop in between. A lot of people forget this in natural horsemanship, is they put energy into the horse, they get the horses to turn in real quickly, and they're really good at sitting back on the back end and then turning the other way. But what's really important in that kind of work is the horse's ability to stop in between. It's what a lot of horses really struggle to do, is when they've got energy in their movements, is they struggle to stop it. They struggle to reduce the energy, or even with that forward energy, they struggle to come to a halt. And it just creates stress, and it makes it very tricky for the horse. And for dressage especially, the halt is really important. We do it twice, at the start of the test and at the end of the test. And you're putting energy into that horse. That halt wants to be square, it wants to be balanced. And so you put your leg on into the halt to get a square halt. And if that horse can't hold a halt with energy being put into them, it's never going to work. And it just creates stress. Horses not understanding where they're going wrong, horses blowing up, is all a sign of stress. There's no stubbornness, there's no just sheer willpower for not wanting to do it. Maybe they've not been shown why it's worth doing it and why it's worth working with the rider, and sometimes that's a thing. And horses can learn behaviours to actively get out of doing things they find stressful or don't understand how to do, or they find it particularly hard to do and they don't see the value in doing it. That's not the same as stubborn. That's not the same as a high-willed horse, just a hot horse. That is stress, and behaviours that they learn in order to mitigate it and to potentially stop them from having to get into the place that is creating the stress. Horses aren't people. They don't think like us. They don't go, every time I do this, my owner shouts at me and I get in lots of trouble if I just did as I was told. This wouldn't happen. They go, that thing's scary, or this thing you're asking of me is hard and stressful, so I'm going to fight you on it. And to remove that stress, or to get rid of that scary thing. Whatever is happening, horses don't think like that. As much as it would be great if they did, they just don't, and we've got to adjust our training capabilities and the way we work with our horses to accommodate the way they think. We're supposed to be the smarter species, and oftentimes we expect our horses to understand us more than we understand them, and oftentimes I think they do. So you do sometimes get horses that are well-rounded enough to do both, where they can do the really hot, cool spins and stuff for the Western, and they can do all that stuff, and then you can come and ride them English and they're on your aids, they're not guessing, they're absolutely fine. But especially in the UK, chances are if you have a horse that's going to be zero issues doing both, and you don't have to be careful about how you put your foundations in and how you use natural horsemanship, chances are those people don't use natural horsemanship. They've never found their way to use natural horsemanship because the horse isn't a problem. They're really easy to do, and they're not looking for answers to something that they're struggling with. So yeah, that's my podcast on why natural horsemanship can cause problems. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments. I'll be doing a live Q&A once a fortnight on my Patreon, which will then be posted onto my YouTube channel, but it won't be live, it'll just be the recorded video. Any questions you have will be answered on that live Q&A. I'll probably also be doing a Q&A podcast to answer some questions too. So that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day. See you in the next one.